Welcome, everyone. I'm going to call to order the City Council meeting of September 7th. We have just come from our executive session. We are having a remote meeting this evening, and our last City Council meeting was held both in person and remotely. However, due to heightened COVID-19 numbers, the City Council has shifted back to remote meetings for the month of September. At this point, we will take a moment to do a roll call of the council members in attendance. Please say here when I call your name. Councilmember Hall has an excused absence this evening. Councilmember DeMichelle.
Here.
Thank you. Councilmember Goodman.
Here.
Thank you. Council President Hunt.
Here.
Thank you. Councilmember Marts.
Here.
Thank you. Deputy Council President Ray.
Here.
And Councilmember Walsh.
Here.
That is 6 of our 7 council members this evening. The next item on our agenda this evening is the Pledge of Allegiance, and I invite you to join along with me, but could you please mute your microphones as we start? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. The next item on our agenda this evening is audience comments. And for those of you who had submitted the online form to make comments, your name will be called shortly. For those of you who have joined us tonight and would like to make comments but did not sign up in advance, please raise your virtual hand, and you can do this by pressing *3 on your phone. If you have joined by a computer or smartphone, look for a hand icon, and this can vary by device. One option may be to go to the participant panel and choose the raise hand icon in the lower right-hand corner. There is also a public hearing tonight on AB 8140, amendments to the sign code, and comments on this topic must be made under the public hearing occurring later in the meeting. And City Clerk, has anyone signed up to speak for general audience comments or indicate a desire to speak this evening?
Mayor, no one signed up in advance to make comments tonight, and I'm just quickly scanning our participant list to see if there are any raised hands. So just one more reminder, if you'd like to comment under this general comment portion of the meeting, to raise your virtual hand by pressing *3 or sending me, the host, a message. I'm going to monitor this for a moment. And I don't see that anyone's indicating a desire to speak.
Thank you, Tisha. As a reminder, if anyone is watching this evening, you can still write comments and submit them to your City Council at any time using the citycouncil@issaquah.gov email address. Council President Hunt, did you have any email comments that you want to summarize on any of tonight's agenda topics?
Thank you, Mayor Polly. This is Council President Hunt. We did receive one email that specifically referenced items that are on tonight's agenda. And while we've been having meetings in the virtual format, I've been summarizing comments we've received that specifically reference items on the agenda of the evening. We received an email from a community member that referenced multiple items on our agenda, including feedback on ID 0948, Cascade Water Alliance update, AB 8140, amendments to the sign code, which is the public hearing later this evening, as well as AB 8227, the second budget amendment. And that concludes the emails that we've received specifically on tonight's items. You're muted.
You knew that had to happen. Thank you, Council President Hunt. We'll be moving on now to committee and regional reports, and tonight we'll be starting with Councilmember DeMichelle.
Thank you, Mayor Polly. Since August 2nd, I've attended several Eastside Human Services Legislative Committee meetings as we met with staff from Senator Murray's and Senator Cantwell's office, as well as with Congresswoman Schreier herself to discuss federal affordable housing and digital access bills and initiatives. I have also been working with an ad hoc committee preparing for the onboarding of Eastside Human Services Forum's first executive director. The Healthier Here Governing Board held meetings on August 2nd and September 2nd, which I attended. And I am also working with a regional youth board preparing for an October discussion of the COVID-19 healthcare impacts on youth. And then finally, I participated with an Eastside Transportation Partnership Subcommittee to prepare ETP's draft legislative priorities for the 2022 legislative session. And we will be holding a meeting this Friday. That completes my report.
Thank you very much, Councilmember DeMichelle. Next up, Councilmember Walsh.
Okay, I forgot that Zach wasn't here. Thank you. I have two short updates. On August 20th, I met with the Issaquah Chamber of Commerce. It was a fairly short conversation. Happened to come right after we had received our latest budget numbers. And so a lot of the conversation was about the budget forecasts, what the sales tax was looking like. Obviously, the chamber is very interested in what that is. And we were able to brief them on some of our industry differences. So they know we're looking at all of those data. We also discussed the Title 18, which is our land use code update, and how the chamber might get involved in that conversation. Also on that day, I met with the Economic Development District Board to talk about the regional economic strategy and have a conversation about priorities. That's an ongoing conversation about how we might approach the regional differences in our economy and how to allocate both funds and projects and things like that. And that concludes my report.
Thank you, Councilmember Walsh. Councilmember Goodman.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Eastside Fire and Rescue Board of Directors will meet this Thursday, September 9th at 4 p.m. We have not resumed in-person meetings, so we will be meeting virtually. On the agenda are our regular fire chief briefings regarding COVID-19, PFAS, and one new item is Labor and Industries pilot program. On the regular business agenda is a Snoqualmie Tribe Ancestral Lands Movement Proclamation, 2021 to 22 biennial operating budget amendment, and a proposed revised board policy regarding roles and responsibilities. And I think that's it for that meeting. Also, the Lodging Tax Advisory Committee will be meeting the 13th. I believe it's at 11 a.m. That's also a virtual meeting. I do not have the agenda in front of me, however. And that concludes my report.
Thank you, Councilmember Goodman. Councilmember Marts.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. The Puget Sound Regional Council Growth Management Policy Board did meet on Thursday, September 2nd. Unfortunately, I was unable to attend as alternate. The Sound Cities Association Public Issues Committee will be meeting September 8th at 7 p.m. Remotely. There is one potential action item, Metro Plan updates and SCA guiding principles. It's the first stage of the two-stage potential action process. So if there's information that comes out of that that looks like potential feedback from our council, then I will bring it forward at a future for good of the order. This concludes my report.
Thank you, Councilmember Marts. Deputy Council President Ray.
Thank you, Mayor Polly. This is Chris Ray. No report this evening, but I did just want to note that the King County Growth Management Planning Council is on hiatus until December of this year. So we had a very, very full and busy first half of the year, and we're having a very slow and empty second half of the year.
Thank you, Deputy Council President. Council President Hunt.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I have two quick reports this evening. The King Conservation District Advisory Committee met on August 10th. We had a number of updates, including a financials update, an update on the substantial reorganization that they're doing within King Conservation District. We also received word earlier in August 2nd, that the board of the King Conservation District had made a decision about the next executive director of King Conservation District, and the new director will start shortly. Her name is Rosa Mendez, and that's very exciting for the district. Several of us on the advisory committee participated in the process of searching for and interviewing for the next executive director of King Conservation District. And the next meeting will be on October 12th at 10 to 12 p.m. and then 10 to noon. And then we also had a meeting of the Title 18 Ad Hoc Committee on September 2nd. This is the ad hoc committee of council members. 2 of us were present for this meeting. That was Councilmember Walsh and myself, and we met with Director Dollywall. We reviewed feedback from the commissions that have begun work on Title 18, which is our land use code and our Issaquah municipal code, our overview of that or overhaul of that. And we also reviewed the public participation plan, taking into account feedback that we had received from the commissions that have begun reviewing different parts of Title 18. There will be a discussion that includes Title 18 at our study session on September 14th. And so we expect as the ad hoc committee to receive a draft email between then and now and to be able to provide feedback potentially by email to the city staff that are working on this before that study session of the whole council. And that concludes my report.
Thank you, Council President Hunt. Next item on the agenda this evening is the mayor's report. There was an executive session held earlier this evening, and another executive session will be held as part of tonight's meeting agenda following our regular business. The item relates to collective bargaining and is expected to last 30 minutes. No action is anticipated to follow an open session. This month, I have issued 3 proclamations. The first recognizes September as Childhood Cancer Awareness Month, and I encourage all citizens to join in activities that will increase awareness and prevention of childhood cancer. The second recognizes September as Recovery Month to promote access to recovery, to celebrate those participating in services, and to reduce barriers of stigma and discrimination. The third proclamation proclaims September 10th through 19th, 2021 as Eastside Welcoming Week, and it is signed by the mayors of Bellevue, Issaquah, Kirkland, Redmond, and Sammamish. We invite the community to engage in opportunities during Eastside Welcoming Week and beyond to learn, connect across differences, and take joint action to achieve a welcoming, equitable, and inclusive community. To learn more about Issaquah's activities, visit issaquahwa.gov/welcomingweek. We are continuing to accept applications from community members interested in serving on the city's new equity board. The application period closes on September 12th, and following the application review and interview process, appointments will be made by the mayor and confirmed by the city council in October. In August, Issaquah's municipal court began holding a community court calendar. The purpose is to provide an alternative response to lower level crimes. Qualified participants are required to perform community service and engage in social service programs. The major goal of the community court is to remove the barriers many of the participants face in obtaining services and ultimately to restore them to self-sufficiency and to reduce recidivism. To do this, the community court calendar utilizes a resource room to bring people together with community service partners specializing in housing services, education, employment, chemical dependency, healthcare, licensing, mental health services, and veteran services. Currently, the resource room is virtual and takes place on Thursdays from 12:30 to 1:30. In the first 3 weeks, Issaquah's participants have already noted how much they enjoy the relaxed feeling in the courtroom and the fact that the judge, the defense attorneys, and prosecutor are getting to know them on a personal level. It is anticipated that the resources will be made available to others in the Issaquah community who need services, and not just those served by the court. More information on the community court calendar and the resources available can be found on the court's webpage on our website. Over the last year, King County worked to provide a variety of temporary housing options for people exposed to, at risk of exposure, or becoming ill with COVID-19. As part of that effort, King County entered into a lease of the Holiday Inn in Issaquah. This was the Issaquah Recovery Center. In the 17 months that the facility was open, 2,057 guests were served from this location. Of the 4 site locations across King County, the Issaquah location served 72% of all people in King County that had not had a home to safely isolate or quarantine in. Of all the guests, the majority were COVID positive. 37% are housed, 73% are experiencing homelessness, and the average length of stay was up from 5 to 10 days. I also wanted to note a few of the upcoming community events. Al Fresco on Front Street still continues through September 12th, and our city farmers market continues through September 25th. And finally, the city of Issaquah Police Department, and Eastside Fire and Rescue will honor the 20th anniversary of 9/11 with a memorial on the steps of City Hall this weekend. Please join us in remembrance. That concludes the mayor's report. And the next item of business is an informational update. This is ID 0948, Cascade Water Alliance. And at the June 21st City Council meeting, council members requested a presentation be provided by the Cascade Water Alliance on the potential water supply development fund being considered by the Cascade Water Alliance Board of Directors. I'd like to invite Gary Schimmick, our Utilities Engineering Manager, to introduce this item. Gary.
Thank you. Good evening, Madam Mayor, City Council, and our administration. Before I go any further, I am going to share my screen. Okay, can I get a confirmation that you are seeing a PowerPoint presentation? Thank you. So as Mayor noted, we're here tonight to talk about the future of Cascade's water supply. And I am joined by two executives from Cascade Water Alliance, Ray Hoffman, the CEO, and Ed Sebrun, the Chief Economist and Treasurer. Go to our next slide and give you a preview of tonight. Ed will be leading this presentation. Of course, Ray and I will be available for questions as needed. But Ed will touch on three major items. First, Cascade's existing water supply, and then the core issue, future water supply scenarios and recommendations. And finally, we're going to ask Council for your feedback on Issaquah's vote at the October Cascade Board meeting to approve creation and implementation of the Water Supply Development Fund that Ed is going to describe. And of course, the Mayor and Delegate Councilmember Hall will be attending that meeting. So I am going to go to the next slide and hand it over to my colleague, Ed Sebrun.
Thank you, Gary, and thank you for having us. As Gary said, we've got a few points to go through. First is a bit of background on Cascade and our current water supply. We have a contract with Seattle. It's a block contract for a fixed amount of water, and it extends through 2039. Following that, it declines year by year to 2063 when the contract ends. At present, that water is projected to be sufficient to meet our needs till 2039, but as soon as it starts declining, would no longer meet the projected demands of our customers. We own Lake Tapps Reservoir as our future water supply, and we own a water right for municipal use. The water right now has conditions which require construction to start by 2040 and substantive completion and full use of the water right by 2060. Our current schedule, given the step down in the Seattle contract, calls for Lake Tapps to be operational by 2042. The model we've been operating under, however, is one that we've already successfully used once in an extension with Seattle that we secured back in 2013, and that is to use available regional supplies to bridge and meet our demands until Lake Tapps is operational. Our demand forecast continues to remain flat despite significant growth in our member agencies and significant growth in our installed customer base. And when we look regionally, the same holds true. So our strategy going forward is to continue to use contract resources as it makes sense and work to extend or secure new contracts to defer when Lake Tapps needs to be developed. And the Lake Tapps project is significant in today's dollars. It would be over $800 million. At the time of estimated construction for a 2042 in-service date, it would be roughly double that with projected inflation. In order for those contracts to be useful, we also have to get an extension of the water right, which I had mentioned there has a 2040 initiation date, and we're pursuing that.
Hey, Ed, this is the mayor.
Hi.
Thank you for coming tonight. What Gary did that was really great was he did provide all of the slides and documentation to council ahead of time. So I was looking at the length of your slide deck, and I want to make sure we have time for council to ask some questions. You've only got through one slide.
Pick up the pace. All right.
Pick up the pace.
I will pick up the pace. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
All right. So through last year's budget and on into a board workshop in June of this year, we have focused on future supply scenarios and costs, how we might proceed forward. Central to that is the concept of what we've termed the Water Supply Development Fund, which is essentially a savings account to accumulate funds to help pay for the project. They'll by no means pay for all of the project, but they can pay a significant down payment that reduces debt impacts and rate impacts of the project when it comes online. Based on that review and discussion, the board directed us to pursue a contract extension with Seattle and in parallel explore a new contract with Tacoma as an alternative, and then to return in October to implement the WSDF. I'll briefly give you some of the scenarios that we've been playing with so you can kind of see the depth and breadth. The base scenario remains getting lake taps on when we need the water. That's in 2042. Construction would start just in about 12 years to meet that timeline. The next scenario would be the simplest in terms of near-term actions, and that is an extension of the Seattle contract. What we've been documenting is a 15-year contract. We've looked at 10 years as a viable option as well as 20, but 15 is probably the sweet spot in terms of how it meets our projected future demands and does not impede Seattle's ability to meet all their other needs. We've similarly looked at a Tacoma contract, and in that case, given the amount of supply that they have available, we've looked at a 20-year agreement as a potential bridge, which would extend us out to about 2060, and that would buy us time to defer some portions of the lake taps development until then, but it would require 2 of the 3 segments of our transmission system to be built in the 2030s to deliver that water. A variation on that would be to secure that supply contract with Tacoma and separately secure a wheeling contract with Seattle. We would deliver water to their Lake Young's area, and from there they would deliver it via the existing transmission network that already supplies us water. That has some advantages, but they're very comparable in style. We also looked at the possibility of Everett, who have a surplus of supply. Frankly, it requires infrastructure that has no future use in our long-term strategy, and it was quickly set aside as something that's out there if we need it, but not a preferred option. And then the last scenario that we've also contemplated and framed up, it was to consider folding back into the flock, as it were, of Seattle purveyor, wholesale purveyors and becoming contract customers and abandoning independent pursuit of supply. Getting back to the WSDF, which has been the focus of discussion with our board, the Supply Development Fund allows us to accumulate, by the time of construction, several $100 million of debt if we do it right, and that reduces our borrowing to roughly $1.1 billion instead of $1.5 billion. It starts with very small steps. In fact, in 2021 and 2022, there's essentially no contributions, but beginning in 2023, there are small contributions being made into the fund, and in 2024, those start stepping up further. What we show here is Issaquah's share of those contributions based on the allocation of member charges that would be supporting it. The total there is in comparison to about $2 million of annual payments that you make right now. Our rate increases, even with funding the WSDF, remain below our projected inflation at 2.2% versus an assumed inflation rate of 3%. So we have a scenario where we're keeping rates below inflation. In real terms, that means the cost of water is declining. Obviously, in nominal terms, there's still increases there. And you can see Issaquah's increases. I'll note there are a few years there where you have higher increases. That's being caused primarily by the supplemental block of water that you're using as part of your management of your independent supply. Providing a graph to summarize what the WSDF does. The gray line is the base scenario with the WSDF. Water is made available by 2042. We have a significant run-up of costs, as you can see, and then that flattens out. This is all inflation adjusted, so think of a flat line as being costs going up with inflation every year. Anything going up is increases greater than inflation. Anything below increases below inflation. In terms of that gray line or the green line, you can see in the early 10 years, we remain below inflation until we hit that construction period. The green line portrays what would happen with an extension from Seattle, and we can continue that and go out over 25 years before we'd be back to the same level of cost that we see today on an inflation adjusted basis. The other point with that green line is that that peak out there is much, much lower in real terms than the peak of building this for 2042. A question was asked in a scenario run, what happens if we take the 15-year extension and then wait 15 years to start the WSDF? That's the yellow line. And what you can see is it does buy us a lower rate profile for that period of time, but then an extremely steep increase in rates. We're talking $5 to $10 per month per residential customer, just at the wholesale level. And the peak that we see is almost identical to the one from the base scenario. It's just been delayed. So back to the WSDF, we have proposed this and have structured it to ensure that it is transparent and accountable. And that's part of the reason for setting it up as a separate fund, so that all the transactions are clear and the board has oversight. And we've set up a hefty oversight role for the board throughout our budget and financial planning processes. And then finally, that concludes the presentation. I know I was trying to fit the time slot, so if there's any questions, I'll be glad to answer them. And I'll turn it back to Gary.
Right, I'm gonna
or the mayor, sorry.
No, no worries.
Share my screen here and open it up for questions. And of course, I can fumble around and go back to any slides if needed.
Thank you, Gary. And thank you, Ed. And we also, do we have, oh, we do, yeah. Before we go to questions, you had said at the beginning, Ed, that you were going to cover two things. And the slide presentation that we just went through with the public talked a lot about the fund itself, but not necessarily water demand. So you may end up getting some questions from the council on that as well.
All right.
And Gary, we will start working our way through. It sounds like Tola has a question, Councilmember Marts has a question first.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I have a question back on the slide, real monthly cost per CERU 2020 to 2026 with Seattle Extension.
Mm-hmm.
So, do we have the net present value for each of those options? Because the aggregate cost to the consumer is going to be basically the integrand under the curve.
Yes.
Right?
We did do net present value for all of these. Actually, Gary, that slide you just had is a good one for that.
Oh, okay.
And I don't have those numbers at my fingertips, but basically from right to left is increasing net present value. Tacoma with wheeling is the lowest net present value cost. Tacoma without wheeling is a close second. The Seattle extension is third, and the base scenario has the highest net present value cost. I've run that cost out far enough that we get through all phases of Lake Tap's development. So typically it's out to 2080 or even 2100 to ensure that we reflect all of the costs in each of those scenarios.
So the lowest sort of aggregate cost, which is what you'd get the net present value for the
Yes.
life of this running out to 2060, would be the Tacoma TPU no wheeling?
Tacoma TPU with wheeling would be the lowest. Now that is contingent on an assumption about what the wheeling cost would be from Seattle. And if it were 10% higher than what I assumed, Tacoma no wheeling would become the lowest option. So they're very, very close.
Got it. All right, thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Marts. Council President Hunt, I believe, is up next.
Thank you, Mayor. This is Council President Hunt. I had a question around demand. My understanding is that over the last 20 years, the projections for demand, the demand itself has gone down a lot. I think it has to do with both individual behaviors, but also the types of developments that are being built and using less water. So you mentioned that population growth that there's been population growth, but flat demand. And so I wondered if there's been a consideration of a scenario in which out past 2060, we continue to see that there is less demand than we expect even at this point. And if so, then have you considered the potential value in doing another assessment later on to see the continuation of the trend in demand?
Yes. And in your packet, there would be a graphic that kind of shows the cumulative regional demands and supply. And leaving Cascade out, by 2060, there's still something like 150 million gallons a day of capacity estimated to be available in excess of the demands of the big three, Tacoma, Everett, and Seattle systems. Our demands at that time are roughly less than 40 million gallons. So there's ample room for us to continue this strategy. And all of the forecasts ultimately tend to have an upward tail again, just because of the growth that's built into them. But for 30 years now, we've really not seen that materialize. You can go back to 1991, and we have lower demands now than we did then, despite 30 or 40% population growth. I think what we're after here is a long enough contract to buy us time, not so long that it puts our water right at risk, but also not so long that it scares the potential suppliers that they might run out of water and have an obligation to us that preempts their own needs. So I kind of see, just as we did 10 years ago, negotiate an extension and then periodically check in and see about extending it again.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember DiMichele had a question, but it was the same one that the Council President had already asked. While I'm waiting to see if there are any other questions, Ed, I know that Councilmember Hall really wanted to be here tonight. He's been working very hard on this issue on the board and wanted to make sure that when he and I come back at a future date to get direction from the council on how they'd like to vote, that they were familiar with both the demand side, the future projections, but also the possible scenarios that may play out and why we would be asking them to vote on a construction development fund. So I think the presentation tonight did a really good job, especially the materials in the packet for those who may be watching at home. There is a significant amount of additional information in there that really paints the story of the demand and also the potential pathways going forward. So not seeing any other questions tonight, I wanted to thank you for coming in and doing this. I think this is a very important part of what the Cascade board needs to consider going forward. And I really appreciate Ray and Gary and Ed sending us all that detailed information and doing the presentation tonight. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So there is no action on that item this evening. It will be coming back at a future date for a council recommendation and direction. The next item is another informational item, ID 0955, a school resource officer update. And this item was last before council at the June 15th council study session. And I'd like to invite our police chief, Scott Bierbaum, to present this item.
Thank you, Mayor. Good evening, Council. My name is Scott Bierbaum, Chief of Police for the City of Issaquah Police Department. Tonight, I'm just going to provide a brief overview of or an update regarding the School Resource Officer Program. Just to reorient to the program, back in May and June of this year, we had community discussions about the school resource officer positions, and then we heard a report out on those listening sessions in a council meeting back on June 15th. Over the summer, no action was determined at that time during the meeting, and the MOU between the school district and the city of Issaquah expired on June 30th of this summer as well for the school resource officer program. New updates on that: on August 26th, the Issaquah School District Board heard a presentation from the school district regarding a plan to potentially implement security personnel in all middle schools and high schools. During that board meeting, the school board expressed interest in hearing more from some of the other our cities that neighbor our city, Sammamish, and then also for unincorporated King County that serves Liberty High School. There has been no decision made yet if whether they are going to implement this school security personnel program throughout the school, or at least as of the time of this update, we had not received word on that. Essentially, the school security personnel would be school security personnel that are trained under the new House Bill 1214 that establishes requirements for reporting and how incidents are responded to within schools. And the school district has presented a plan to hire and train those staff over the next 6 to 7 months. As you know, school started on August 31st. And of course, we have been coordinating with school district personnel for any sort of necessary police responses at the schools to date. As a reminder, the Issaquah High School currently has a security personnel working within the schools and has worked there for years. And he also responds to Issaquah Middle School, which is positioned right next to Issaquah High School. We are continuing to have discussions on how we can continue to partner with providing opportunities within the schools, either working with youth advisory groups or to work within other opportunities to connect with the school community. That's the basic overview. I kind of ran through it kind of quickly. There is additional written report that is also associated with the packet for tonight's council meeting. So I'm available for any questions if council has any.
Thank you, Chief, and thank you for the update in the packet. Are there any questions from council? I'll keep my eye on the chat. Councilmember DiMichele.
Thank you, Mayor Polly. And Chief Beerbaum, thank you for the update. And I know you said that there's continuing conversations going on about how you're going to be working together. I'm just wondering, will the school safety officers, will they be partaking at any time in some of the training that's available to our officers? And I guess what I'm looking for is there going to be a common language between that personnel and our officers, and ways of cooperating so that they understand each other's operations?
Councilmember DiMichele, that's a great question. We have been discussing with the director of security for the school district, and he actually is a former school resource officer. So we are very lucky to be able to have that former partnership as well. But yes, that will be a part of our conversation of how we communicate, how we report, how we will respond to incidents. So that is all part of those conversations. So yes, I do agree. Common language and understanding of how we respond and what the terminology is will be very important. And as we said, we've been very fortunate to be working with the current assigned security officer at the Issaquah High School for over a decade.
Oh, okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councilmember DiMichele. I am not seeing any other questions at this time. So I'd like to thank you, Chief, for all the information and providing the update this evening.
Thank you. Have a good evening.
Thanks. The next item on our agenda this evening is the consent calendar, and it was distributed to council in advance. If authorized, the items on the consent calendar will be considered together and approved by one motion. I'd like to now turn it over to Councilmember DiMichele, who would like to make a statement before we go through the approval.
Thank you very much, Mayor Polly. Just a moment, let me go to another screen. Thank you. So I would like to state for the record that I am currently employed with an entity that is included in the city's Payables Influence the Choice. I currently fill the role of temporary executive director of Influence the Choice. The city serves as a fiscal agent for this agency in the disbursement of a federal grant. Grant funds are being dispersed under this month's accounts payable. I have asked for advice from the city attorney as to whether this warrants a conflict of interest and have been informed that I am not legally required to be excused from voting as the city is carrying out a decision that was previously made by the council. However, for the sake of transparency, I would like to declare this employment and have my statement entered in the minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember DiMichele. Have the payables and payroll been reviewed?
They have.
Yes.
Thank you. Does any council member desire to remove any item from the consent calendar and consider it under regular business? And if not, can I get a motion? Council President Hunt.
Thank you. I move to approve the consent calendar as it appears in this evening's agenda.
Second.
Thank you, Deputy Council President Ray. A motion has been made to approve it has been moved and seconded to approve the consent calendar as submitted, and so I'll go to our city clerk for a roll call vote.
Yes, starting with Councilmember Marts.
Aye.
Deputy Council President Ray.
Aye.
Councilmember Walsh.
Aye.
Councilmember DiMichele.
Aye.
Councilmember Goodman.
Aye.
Councilmember Hunt.
Aye.
That's 6 ayes, 0 nays.
Thank you. That passes unanimously. The next item of business this evening is the public hearing. This is AB 8140. It's amendments to the sign code, and we will be conducting the hearing this evening. The item was last before City Council at the July 27th, 2021 Council Study Session. And I'd like to invite Lucy Sloman, our planning manager, to present this item. Welcome, Lucy.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Is my presentation showing?
It is showing.
Excellent. So I return to you tonight on the sign code for a public hearing. I'm Lucy Sloman, CPD Land Development or Planning Manager these days. As you well remember, the sign code is phase 1 of the Title 18 update. We had a hearing with the Planning Policy Commission and then 2 study sessions with council. Due to the changes, the extent of changes made during the study sessions, we are returning tonight to council for another public hearing. The background of the sign code is that we have several goals. One is to consolidate 2 codes, one that's in the IMC 1811 and one that is in the Central Issaquah Standards, Chapter 9, as well as some sign guidance that is in the Old Town Design Standards. Second, we're wanting to comply with the U.S. Supreme Court case of Reed versus the town of Gilbert, Arizona, which upended many temporary signs, especially non-commercial temporary sign codes. And so we want to bring it into compliance with that. The council developed a set of goals and outcomes associated with Title 18, including the umbrella goals and goal 12, which is specifically related to the sign code. And we've focused a lot on usability and streamlining in response to that. And finally, we want to bring consistency to the sign code. There are provisions and processes and all kinds of things that vary across our city, and we want to make them consistent except where neighborhood distinctions are important. So what we've proposed to you complies with the Supreme Court case, consolidates the codes, makes things consistent, and protects the Mountains to Sound corridor that we have identified as being such an important value in our community. One of the aspects beyond the actual sign code are changes to the fees associated with signs. This would have no fees for temporary signs as proposed and no permits. Although permanent signs are 30% of the permits that are issued, they're 70% of the fees. So our proposal to make it easier and more streamlined for temporary signs is to not have permits or fees and rely on those from the permanent signs. We would add a lower fee for some additional signs that applicants frequently say they won't apply for because the current sign permits are more expensive by several factors than the actual signs cost. We're proposing a two-tier sign fee to recognize that some signs require more than one discipline to review them. We're eliminating the reinspection fee and although it's not shown on this slide, we are proposing since the last study session a change to the Front Street banner fee. The reason for that is that council has asked us to recover our costs, and currently the Front Street banner fee only recovers a portion of the costs of putting up and taking down the banners. And there will also be additional staff time associated with managing the schedule that we haven't done in the past. Your options are to either remand the sign code or to proceed to adoption, to decline to change or modify the changes that are proposed for either the fees or the minor change that we're proposing to the sign requirements. We also, in the ordinance, have given you the language to implement a procedural change that we've been talking about, which is removing the Development Commission from the review of signs. We've talked about this previously, but had not presented the actual code edits that would be necessary to implement it, and they are shown in the ordinance now. Our process so far has been 7 informal meetings in early 2019 and at the turn of the year from 2020 to 2021. We began our formal process in March of this year with a discussion draft meeting with PPC and EBC, and then the public hearing in April that I previously mentioned. Our 2 council study sessions were in May and July of this year. Tonight will be our public hearing to give the public an opportunity to comment on the changes that were made since the PPC hearing. And we have tentatively scheduled adoption for September 20th based on the direction we received from you tonight. Our recommendation, therefore, is to repeal and replace IMC 1811, repeal Central Issaquah Chapter 9, repeal most of the sign design section in the Old Town Design Standards, revise sign fees, revise the sidewalk use district insurance, and revise the administration and procedure chapters in IMC 1803 and 1804. And that concludes my presentation.
Thank you, Lucy. In case those that are watching may not realize, this is years of work that got interrupted by COVID, and it is a really huge lift. Having been a development commissioner for 20 years and working on signs, I can tell you this is long, long, long overdue. So we will now go, so thank you for all you have done. We'll now go to council for any questions, and I'm looking in the chat right now, and I don't see anybody lined up, but I'll give it a second or so. Does not appear that we have any questions this evening that I can see. So thank you for the presentation. I will now be opening the public hearing at 7:58 p.m. And again, for those of you who have joined us tonight and would like to make comments but did not sign up in advance, please raise your virtual hand, which you can do on your phone by pressing *3. Or if you're on a computer or smartphone, look for a hand icon, and this varies by device to device. One option may be to go to the participant panel and choose the raise hand icon in the lower right-hand corner. Tisha, has anyone signed up to speak or indicated a desire to speak this evening?
Yes, Randy Banneker has indicated a desire to speak. Randy, in just a moment, I'll move you up as a panelist. You should then see the option to unmute and can also choose to turn your video on. Randy, you have the floor.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Mayor, council members. Is my audio coming through?
Perfectly clear.
Appreciate the opportunity to comment tonight. Randy Banneker, I'm here on behalf of the Seattle King County Realtors. We want to express our full support for the revised sign code. Our members place a high value on the ability to use real estate signs in the city of Issaquah. Signs aid in a swift sale and promote fair housing practices. We believe the draft code fully complies with the United States Supreme Court decision of Reed versus the town of Gilbert, Arizona. Further, the reorganization of the code, including tables and images of sign types, we feel offers greater ease of understanding, which will boost compliance with the code. We wish to thank you for your work through many study sessions on the code, and staff for their good work and their responsiveness to our questions. We encourage your adoption. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Randy. Is there anyone else, Tisha, that has indicated a desire to speak this evening?
Mayor, no one else has signed up in advance, and I'm just quickly looking through our list of participants. And I'm not seeing that anyone else would like to make comments during the public hearing.
Great, thank you very much. Is there any objection to closing the public hearing? And I'll give a few seconds. Hearing none, the public hearing is closed at 8:01 p.m. No action is being requested on this item tonight. The council is anticipated to take action on this item at the September 20th, 2021 council meeting. Thank you very much for the presentation this evening, Lucy.
Thank you.
The next item, and good work. This is good work. The next item of business this evening is regular business. It's AB 8227, the second 2021 budget amendment, and the action before the request before the council this evening is to adopt this ordinance. And this is the first time this item is before the council. I'd like to invite Acting Finance Director Autumn Monahan and Acting Budget Manager Susie Munsell to present this item.
Thank you, Madam Mayor and members of the council. I'll wait for Susie to start sharing her screen. And while we wait, my name is Autumn Monahan. I'm serving as Interim Finance Director. I'm here with Susie Munsell tonight, who is our Acting Budget Manager, with a quick presentation on proposed second round of amendments for the budget for 2021. Budget amendments are required when expenditures in a fund are forecasted to exceed what has been appropriated. This proposed set of amendments includes adjustments to 10 city funds and accounts for nearly 1.1 million in adjusted revenues and about 2.7 million in adjusted expenditures. This amendment includes 26 items divided into 3 categories we typically use to describe mid-year budget adjustments. The first is previously approved requests. There are 5 items that were already approved in concept by the City Council via other agenda bills. There are also 3 items that are technical corrections to the 2021 budget that were identified after the council adopted the budget. And then we have 18 requests for new or increased funding that have not previously been considered by the City Council as budget adjustments. And now I'll hand it over to Susie to review the budget adjustments in more detail. And as you'll hear, there are many priorities that departments are ready to begin now and utilize our increased one-time capacity. We also have several department directors here tonight to answer any specific questions. And with that, Susie.
Thank you, Autumn. Given the number of budget adjustments proposed in this amendment, we wanted to provide some background on the methodology for why many of them are included tonight. The 18 budget adjustments proposed in this amendment primarily fall into 3 buckets. The first, expanding expenditure authority for funds that cannot absorb unanticipated costs. So these are funds like the street operating fund, the sustainability fund, or the cable TV fund that adopt pretty narrow expenditure authority each year. The second bucket is new positions that are anticipated to be funded in the proposed 22 budget coming later this month. And these positions are either time sensitive or they may take longer to fill. So we're looking for council authorization to begin that process ahead of the 2022 budget process. And the third bucket, as Autumn mentioned, is projects or work that has been planned, though not yet proposed for this year, due to, in some cases, lack of funding availability. And given the results of the general fund financial forecast that was presented last month, the city is anticipating fairly large one-time funding capacity that can be utilized in 2021 or 2022. And these items proposed in this amendment that fall into this bucket are things that departments are ready to begin now. And by including them in this amendment, it allows the it also allows the administration to better anticipate the beginning 2022 fund balance as we are preparing the 2022 proposed budget. I am now going to very briefly run through each of the items proposed in this amendment. And since this information is also provided in tonight's council packet, I will go through these pretty quickly. But we also have various staff, as Autumn mentioned, on the call tonight to answer any programmatic questions the council may have on these items. And we would also like at the end of this presentation to address some questions that we received from Council President Hunt prior to the meeting that we would like to address at the end. So the first item, starting with the previously approved request, AB 8054 from March 15th of this year authorized the acceptance of a almost $42,000 grant from the local hazardous waste management program. And this grant revenue is intended to support education and outreach to residents on relevant topics like waste reduction, avoiding toxic chemicals, and waste disposal options. And while the 2021 adopted budget anticipated receiving the grant, it underestimated the amount awarded. And this amendment increases the revenues and associated expenditures in the Sustainability Fund to match that final grant award. Second, AB 8120 from April 5th authorized the purchase of 2 pieces of equipment to allow the Public Works Street Division field crew to supplement the contracted efforts performed under the Pavement Management Program, which is the CIP project TR030. And this amendment transfers the funds necessary to purchase the equipment from the Capital Project Fund, and specifically the Pavement Management Program, to the Fleet Fund to purchase the equipment. Third, in the previously approved request, AB 8216 from August 2nd, authorized the acceptance of a $228,000 grant from the Summer Enrichment and Experiences for Kids, or the SEEK program, through the Association of Washington Cities, for the purchase of a portable stage to be used for a wide variety of city programming for the community. And this amendment captures this grant revenue and adds the associated expenditures to the general fund. Fourth, AB 8141 from March of this year authorized the acceptance of a almost $39,000 grant from the 2021 Port of Seattle Economic Development Partnership Program. While the 2021 adopted budget anticipated receiving this grant, it also underestimated the amount awarded. So this amendment, very small, increases the revenues and associated expenditures in the general fund, to match the final grant award. And finally, on the previously approved request, AB 8155 from May 3rd approved the adoption or the creation of an emergency manager position. And so the city currently allocates some emergency management costs to each of the 3 utilities. So this amendment adds the cost for this position to the street operating fund, the water fund, the sewer fund, and the stormwater fund, really using the same methodology other emergency management costs use. And it assumed a mid-August start date, which is when our new emergency manager started. Of the 3 budget correction items, first in February, City Council approved the reauthorization of certain funds previously budgeted in 2020 for expenditure in 2021. And the list of 2020 reauthorizations approved in February did not, however, include a needed carryover of funds for work performed by the Government Finance Officers Association, or GFOA, to assist with the development of the city's new chart of accounts. This amendment adds that $81,000 of unspent funds from 2020 out of the general fund to support the completion of GFOA's work in 2021. Second, the 2021 adopted budget mistakenly excluded the costs associated with the domestic violence advocate. And this amendment adds, it's just $10,000 of general fund expenditures to support this activity. And finally, the 2021 adopted budget anticipated receiving about $63,000 from the Waste Reduction and Recycling Program grant, but did not fully adopt the associated expenditures. Instead, only budgeting $30,000 for the activity associated with this grant. So this amendment increases the expenditures by the $33,000-ish to get it to the amount awarded in the Sustainability Fund. Turning to the proposed budget adjustments. First, at the June 29th, 2021 City Council study session, staff requested council feedback regarding the reestablishment of a traffic signal operations engineer position in the Public Works Street Engineering Division. And following a discussion at that study session, the council indicated a preference to move forward with adding this position. And so this amendment adds the needed funds in the street operating fund to support the creation of this position, assuming a December hire date. And this position will also be included in the mayor's proposed 2022 budget. And it's important to note that this position, and that this adjustment will add 1 FTE over the current staffing levels adopted for 2021. Similarly, and adding an FTE over current staffing levels, the Community Planning and Development Department has requested the addition of a long-range planning division manager. And this position would lead the long-range planning division, comprised of 1 transportation planner to be reallocated from the Public Works Department, 1 part-time senior planner, and 1 associate planner. And this position would also lead and manage the city's efforts in state mandated planning initiatives and strategic community planning efforts, such as transit-oriented planning, other sub-area neighborhood planning, and establish partnerships at a regional level to implement community goals. And so this amendment adds the needed funds out of the general fund to support the creation of this position, also assuming a December hire date. Next, in the HR department, since they have taken on risk management function from the executive department and other functions from the finance department as part of the Munis implementation project, the administration is requesting the temporary reclassification of the current HR coordinator to an HR analyst to be proposed as a permanent reclassification as part of the mayor's proposed 22 budget, and the hiring of a new HR coordinator. And this action will allow the department to support labor relations, staffing, including a stronger focus on staffing and retention in the police department, Munis, project management, COVID staffing impacts, and more. And this amendment adds the needed funds to the general fund in 2021 to support the addition of the new HR coordinator and temporary reclassification of the current HR coordinator to an HR analyst. And like the 2 before this, this addition will also add 1 FTE over current staffing levels. Next, the police department has requested the addition of a limited term communications coordinator. And this position is intended to help with communication and recruitment efforts to attract candidates to the City of Issaquah Police Department for employment. The department anticipates hiring several new employees in the coming year, and a specific focus on both recruitment and retention is needed. So this amendment adds the needed funds in the general fund in 2021 to support the addition of this new, this would be a limited term employee. And so moving from the proposed positions, the city's intelligent traffic system, or ITS, has many components that have reached the end of their service life or have failed and need to be replaced. These items include vehicle detection systems, signal heads, and signal cabinets. Over the past few budget cycles, these items were selected to be deferred while they were still operational in order to meet necessary budget reductions. So this amendment adds $250,000 of straight operating fund expenditures supported by an interfund transfer from the general fund to restore the previous budget reductions and put ITS back on an appropriate maintenance cycle. Next, at the August 2nd, 2021 City Council meeting, Council received an updated 2021 general fund forecast that anticipated a $1.2 million increase to Community Planning and Development Department revenues over the 2021 adopted budget. And some of this increased revenue, however, is offset by expenditures passed through to consultants assisting in this work. While these increased expenditures were also anticipated as part of the 21 general fund forecast at that August 2nd meeting, additional expenditure authority will be needed to support these costs over what was anticipated in the 21 budget. So this amendment adds $227,000 approximately of general fund expenditures to formally increase that expenditure authority to support these costs. Next, due to the transition out of the City Hall Northwest facility, a large number of paper records from the Public Works, Human Resources, and Community Planning and Development departments need to be reviewed, processed, and digitized. This project will improve the security and access of these records, as well as reduce the future physical space needed for records. So this amendment adds $50,000 of general fund expenditures in 2021 to begin this work, with additional funding to be included in the mayor's proposed 2022 budget to complete this project in 2022. Next, and similarly, the municipal court is currently digitizing open court files into an electronic content management solution utilizing SharePoint. Equipment was funded for this project in 2020 through the Administrative Office of Courts or CARES Act funding to provide a virtual courtroom platform and promote remote appearances. The court is requesting $15,000 in 2021 for overtime costs to convert court files into that electronic format. And this project will streamline court processes, increase efficiencies, and provide on-demand access to court records. Next, we have a series of information technology mid-year adjustments that include enhancing physical security of city buildings, replacing failing smartphones for the Public Works and Parks and Community Services departments, and supporting a hybrid workforce with video conferencing, additional desktop hardware, and cybersecurity improvements. This amendment adds $447,000 approximately of IT fund expenditures, as well as initiating the required interfund transfers from the other city funds to support this work in the IT fund, consistent with how other city IT costs are budgeted. And given the total amount of these adds and the number of smaller items that make up that total, I'm going to hand the floor over to our IT manager, John Traeger, to provide a little more detail on what's included in these adds.
Okay. Hi, this is John Traeger. I'm the technology manager for the City of Issaquah. And thank you, Susie, for that intro. So the type of projects involved are, there's a lot of little ones and a few bigger ones involved. So I think there was a detail sheet in front of the slide section that had a bunch of items listed. And so some of them were some smaller projects that had been put off due to the budgetary changes. Some of them are projects that were happening because of external factors such as the change in the cybersecurity risk conditions that were from when we did the original budget in 21. Things have really ramped up as far as risk and attacks on our systems. And then some of it is related to hybrid work from home and return to office efforts. So in the new small, new small projects category, we have some security access controls. For example, to its manor is now, or will soon be, or was once, the hybrid meeting facility for boards and commissions. And the building doesn't really have any adequate security for after hours employees to be on site. So we have to upgrade it with some security, door controls and camera systems for security. We have some costs that are associated with the police dispatch migration. We had to integrate our Spillman with the Redmond Spillman and set up a data connection. So we had to use a third-party vendor for that. We've also have a new connection from our NeoGov HR system to the Munis payroll system, which is going live at the first of next year. So that connection has to be set up for the years out. We have had some incidents in the Public Works yard, and so we're adding security equipment to that yard. The court building and also doesn't have security system at all, the council chambers, if you will. And so during the day, the municipal court is asked to get better door control and security system involved there. And there's a King County lot that is adjacent to Public Works operations facility that is used for impounding vehicles. And we need to get a data connection to that site for security cameras, because if we're impounding vehicles, we have to make sure they're safe, secure. There's a restoration of the COVID cuts. So one of them was the hours of PT&R hours that would have assist us with return to office efforts. Another one was the hardware replacement. Budget was cut almost in half. I'd like to restore that as we have equipment that's wearing out and needs replacement. Most of that is mobile phones or smartphones, if you will. And so those are basically almost the cost of a computer. And they're used heavily in the field by Public Works and facilities. And they're near the end of life. We're starting to have system failures on those. Then around the hybrid workforce initiatives, there was, well, we're using WebEx and it expand the subscription service for that. There was additional equipment needed that we'll need to support the move of the permit center. We're also would like to implement remote desk phone apps so that when folks are working either in the field or working from home, they can use the soft phone to field calls from the public when they're on the move and make calls that would also appear to come from their city desk phone. And there's additional meeting equipment for virtual meeting spaces as hybrid starts ramping up later this year, hopefully, as people return to office. Cybersecurity risk reduction, there was additional training for staff, some additional software, and there's also some additional video equipment to physically secure cybersecurity locations. Or network rooms and that type of place to remain compliant with regulations for cybersecurity. And then there's a few PCs for new staff was listed there for assuming that these positions mentioned earlier actually get filled this year. They'll need equipment to do their jobs. And some other minor software. So that's kind of the list. Sorry, I kind of droned on, but that's what we have proposed here.
Thank you, John. So I'm gonna keep rolling through these remaining items at a pretty good clip. So the next budget adjustment proposed tonight is the purchase of an additional large mower requested by the Parks and Community Services Department. And this equipment would greatly increase efficiency in the Parks Operations Division, accomplishing a variety of tasks in addition to mowing through the use of various attachments. So this amendment transfers the $65,000 from the general fund to the fleet fund, as well as the associated expenditures in the fleet fund to purchase that equipment. Next, the replacement of treadmills and other fitness equipment at the community center was approved for the 2020 budget, but was eliminated as part of the mid-year COVID reductions in 2020. With the community center reopened, the need for replacement remains. And this amendment adds the $55,000 of general fund expenditures needed to replace this equipment, as well as to install new rubberized flooring for the fitness area. Next, the deck and embedded art on the Confluence Park Bridge needs to be repaired. While a sustainable maintenance solution will be part of that repair work, the currently adopted park operations budget does not have sufficient funding to complete this work. So this amendment adds the $20,000 out of the general fund that will be needed to complete these repairs. Next, the Parks and Community Services Department has requested funding for Pickering Barn landscaping renovations and improvements. This work would create a larger vision and planting plan, including partnering with the local master gardeners. This project would also include bed work, plant material, replacing aging arbors, and pathway fence repairs. This amendment would add the $25,000 of general fund expenditures that will be needed to complete this work in 2021. Next, the administration requests additional funding for the climate action plan work to support increased community engagement. And this additional engagement will allow for focus groups and consultant support for facilitating meetings. So this amendment adds $7,000 of sustainability fund expenditures that will be needed to complete this work. We are nearing the end of this list. The administration requests additional funding for supplies to support a hybrid work environment, including chairs, desktop lifts, and other office equipment. And this amendment adds $25,000 of general fund expenditures that will be needed to complete these purchases. Next, the administration requests additional funding to add new electric bikes to the city fleet, as well as bike parking equipment for park staff at the Parks Facilities Building. And the purpose of those investments is to employ more environmentally friendly tools for staff to conduct basic maintenance needs through the city and provide efficient travel choices for staff traveling between city buildings. And this amendment adds $15,000 of general fund expenditures that will be needed to complete those purchases. For the penultimate item in tonight's amendment, the city's existing solid waste collection and processing contract, which provides collection and hauling of all residential and commercial garbage, recycling, and compost, will conclude in June of 2023. The administration plans to engage a consultant to assist with the request for proposals, rate evaluation, and contract finalization. The target date for the council approval of the new contract is May of 2022. And this amendment adds $25,000 of sustainability fund expenditures to support the 2021 portion of consultant renegotiation. And the second portion of this consultant work is anticipated to be included in the mayor's proposed 2022 budget. And finally, the Communications Office requests additional funding for part-time non-regular hours to support virtual and hybrid meeting coverage, along with professional services to assist with citywide video production and technology upgrades. So this amendment adds $28,000 cable TV fund expenditures to support this work. All told, this table details the total revenue and expenditure impacts by fund of the items proposed in tonight's amendment. And in total, the net impact across all funds is a reduction of total fund balance of $1,590,280. And finally, we wanted to take a moment tonight to briefly discuss the $400,000 that was designated in the 2021 adopted budget for the Community Recovery Fund of the City Council. In the City Council's final budget deliberation for 2021, Council designated this one-time $400,000 for future allocation given extraordinary circumstances at the time of the 2021 budget deliberation. And these circumstances include the unique combination of the anticipation of future community needs arising from the ongoing COVID pandemic, associated economic challenges, and possible reductions to availability of services, as well as the unexpected relative strengths of revenues, as described in the economic forecast in November of last year. So Council began preliminary discussion on appropriate uses of the community recovery funds, which would could include COVID recovery and COVID response expenses, community recovery expenses, and public safety expenses, including expenses related to police services. And given that we are now in September, the administration would like to propose the use of this $400,000 to cover costs of items previously approved by the council earlier this year, including $45,000 for emergency housing assistance, $250,000 for business assistance grants, $40,000 for the Parks Fit and Fun initiative, and $55,000 for a contribution to the Friends of the Issaquah Salmon Hatchery. And for the first three items on this list, at the time they were introduced to the council back in February, the administration hoped to be able to utilize future federal relief funds, what ultimately became the American Rescue Plan Act, or ARPA. Given the complexity and evolving direction on what ARPA funds can actually be spent on, the administration proposes using the Community Recovery Fund of the City Council for these items rather than waiting for further clarity on ARPA eligibility. So that's the end of my formal presentation tonight. So I would, before opening it up to further questions, I do want to take a moment to respond to a few questions that we received prior to the meeting from Council President Hunt. So the first question was regarding if the proposed position adds were new positions versus a return to prior staffing levels prior to COVID budget reductions. The traffic signal operations engineer was unfunded with the 2020 adopted budget and was eliminated with the 2021 adopted budget. The long-range planning manager and human resources coordinator were both positions that were eliminated as part of those COVID budget reductions and were subsequently not included in the 2021 adopted budget. The police communications coordinator, LTE, would be a new position, though is only anticipated to last through 2022. The second question was regarding the IT mid-year adjustments and if these represent a likely ongoing cost of business associated with supporting a hybrid workforce and how these adjustments relate to prior budgeted IT expenditures. And I know our IT manager addressed much of this in his overview of these ads, but we're of course happy to circle back to this question should further clarity on that be needed. The third question was regarding the community planning and development consultant pass-through increase, which was item 14 on this list, and if these expenditures were already spent in 2021. The question also asked why we were anticipating about $1.2 million in additional revenue, but that we're only including the expenditure side of this amendment. Generally, we do not typically do budget amendments for anticipated revenue increases unless they're tied to something firm, like a grant acceptance. While the increased $1.2 million of revenue from the forecast is based on the best information that we have at this moment in time, it's not a firm number set in stone. Since we can always bring in more revenue than we budgeted, but we can't spend more expenditures, we want to make sure that we have sufficient authority for the expenditures associated with this anticipated revenue increase. But it's typically best practice not to adjust revenues via amendment based on a forecast. The fourth question was regarding the number of items in this amendment that fell below $50,000 and if council approval was necessary to move them forward. I'm asking if they were included in the amendment tonight because in aggregate, they were considerably more than $50,000. That is correct. The general fund items in particular, even though many of these items are below $50,000, in aggregate, the net impact is significant to require an adjustment to ensure sufficient expenditure authority. For non-general fund items below $50,000, these primarily fall into that first bucket, or I believe the first bucket that we addressed at the top of this presentation. And so these are the funds that have narrow expenditure authority and therefore can't absorb unanticipated costs, even if they do fall below $50,000. And the final question was where these adjustments place us relative to the targeted 15 to 20% of undesignated fund balance as a percent of budgeted expenditures. And we have not run the impact on undesignated fund balance as a percent of budgeted expenditures for 2021, primarily because it's still a bit of a moving target at this point in 2021. It is safe to say, however, that given the optimistic revenue forecast I presented last month, where we're likely to end 2021, that we're likely to end it with a pretty comfortable fund balance, well above 15%, even following these amendments. Doing this amendment at this point, however, gives us a better picture of where we're forecasted to begin 2022 based on this best information at this moment in time, and therefore what sort of expenditures we should be considering as part of the 2022 proposed budget to make sure that we end 2022 within that 15 to 20% target. So I hope that answers the questions received earlier, but we're of course happy to circle back if more clarity is needed on any of these items or any other items. So I'm going to go ahead and take my presentation down now and turn it back to Mayor Pauly.
Thank you, Susie, John, and Autumn for all that information. That was a lot. I'm going to keep my eye on the chat to see if there are any additional council questions, but thank you very much for repeating the questions and answers that Council President had submitted ahead of time. And it looks like Council President Hunt has a question.
Thank you, and thanks also for going over my questions. I did have a couple clarifying questions. Maybe I just missed it. So one was on the community planning and development expenses. One part of my question on that was, it seems like that expense had already been spent on consultants in 2021. Is that correct?
It is, some of it will have already been expended. Some of it is anticipated based on the revenue that we're still expecting to collect by the end of this year. So it is anticipated. I would say some of it is spent, yes. Some of it is not yet spent.
Okay. If there is additional clarity on that, that would be helpful. It's one of the bigger amendments that I didn't quite understand. The other thing is, I think at the end, my understanding of the answer to the question about fund balance at the end of 2021 is that with these amendments, we expect the ending fund balance to be between 15 and 20% of expenditures, which is what we strive for according to our current financial policy. I think that was what you said at the end, but I wasn't sure. So I wanted to confirm that.
Yes, thank you for clarifying that. Based on the August forecast, it is safe. I believe it is safe to assume that we will end 2021 above 20%. That what we're hoping to do at this point is use these amendments to better understand where we will expect to end 21, to give us an idea of where we expect to begin 22, so that we can ensure that as we are preparing the 2022 budget, that as we propose the ending percentage of fund balance to budgeted expenditures, that at the end of 22, we fall within that 15 to 20% range. At this point in the year, it is difficult to anticipate where we will end the year. We can run what that percent is based on our best knowledge at this moment in time and provide that to the council, but it is very likely subject to change before the end of the year.
Council President Hunt, did you have an additional question or a follow-up question?
I do have one more, but I think other people may have questions, so if you can circle back to me.
Sure. I think the next one we had was Councilmember Marts, who is now not going to be asking a question. So let's have some comments from City Administrator Bobkowitz, and then we'll come back to Council President.
Yes, thank you, Madam Mayor, members of the council. Let me just put a finer point on Susie's comments and answer to the council president's question on fund balance. Mayor Pauly's directed us to come to the council with a budget for 2021 that will make sure that the fund balance is within that 15 to 20%. What we're looking at is for current year, there may be more money that we would come back to the council and ask to spend prior to the end of the year. And so as we're working on the 22 budget, we're keeping an eye on that. But the 22 budget that you will see with all of the spending will be within that 15 to 20% range. Quite honestly, I think, Susie, at this point, we're looking at a budget that would be 19% fund balance. So that's what we're shooting for. The council's made it very clear that you would like the administration to be more precise with fund balance and to not have excess fund balance. So one of the reasons we're here this evening is to invest those dollars today in services for the community.
Thank you, City Administrator Bobkowitz. That was well said. Not seeing any additional questions. I'm going to come back to Council President for a follow-up.
Thank you. I think I have the answer, but the revenue, although it's still a projection, because the revenue is higher than we predicted, that has effectively outpaced even this round of expenditures. So we would expect that this round of expenditures, in addition to the budget, plus potentially more expenditures, would get us into the range that's in our financial policy. Did I capture that correctly?
Seeing some head
Yes.
nods.
Yes,
Okay.
Madam Mayor, if I can just add,
Okay.
we're still looking at revenues for current year. We will do what we have in past years, a revised revenue forecast once the proposed budget comes out. You know, we at this point feel comfortable that there will be additional dollars to be spent. Quite honestly, we have already targeted a source or a funding plan or a scenario that we would like to address, and that is our fleet fund. And so we are continuing to work on that. Quite honestly, we only have so many hands working on the budget at any one time. So the direction has been, let's get the proposed budget out over the next 2 weeks and then come back to the council to talk about some additional spending for 21. But we feel very confident with the budget that Mayor Pauly will be presenting to you in a couple of weeks that we are going to do what the council has asked of us, and that is to have that fund balance be spent down.
Council President Hunt.
Oh, thank you. Okay, that was my biggest question. I feel that I understand it now. I would like more information on the consultants for CPD and what that was spent on. I still don't feel that I completely understand that one and if it was anticipated.
And Madam Mayor, if I may call a friend, Ms. Dollywall, I believe she's on, if she would like to add some additional information.
That'd be great.
Good evening, Council and Madam Mayor. And so the one thing I will add to that is, yes, we can certainly give you the consultant costs, but they were mostly for specialty fields like the building design for the school district and also for the larger buildings like Costco that we don't have the in-house expertise to do the building review for. So majority of them were for these larger projects, one-time kind of costs that got factored into the review for those. And partly it is for us understanding how we are capturing these consultant costs. And there was some changes to the accounting system that also, we created one account for where every consultant cost was being captured in. So it was a transition from 2020 to 2021. So as 2022, I think it'll some of those permits that were applied under the old system in our permitting software were for the different. Maybe I'm confusing the matter more for you, but ultimately it is the revenues are more. It's the larger projects that have come in. So typically these consultant costs would have been under that line item, but they are exceeding what we anticipated to be spent for the consultants. But the revenues are coming in more as well.
Did that help, Council President?
Yes, I think that helps. And so this could have been, this is due to the magnitude and complexity of projects this year. It wasn't specifically COVID related or other, and we wouldn't also, the other part of my question and a bunch of the earlier questions I asked too was around whether we would anticipate that this is truly one time or a new trend. And it seems that this is one time due to the project. So that did help.
Correct. And we'll be bringing forth a fee schedule that will kind of clarify which ones are passed through costs and which ones are covered by our building permit fees. So majority of these are related to building permits, not other consultant costs, but mostly for the building review expertise.
Thank you. I'm not seeing any other questions at this time. Is somebody wanting to make a motion? Council President Hunt.
Thank you. I move to adopt ordinance number 2951, amending the 2021 budget as set forth in ordinance number 2927 and amended in ordinance number 2939 concerning revenues, expenditures, and fund balance for various funds for the year 2021.
Thank you. Deputy Council President Ray?
Second.
It has been moved and seconded, and if there is no further, it's been moved and seconded. Is there any further discussion? And let's go to Council Member Marts.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'm going to regretfully vote no on this. I think a magnitude this large of a bite out of the general fund, I think really requires an update of the projected ending fund balance, especially because we've been in a time of fast-moving change in our funds, and I just think that as part of fiscal hygiene in the future, when we have 7-digit changes, we just really need to. If somebody stopped me on the street and said, "Are you sure that this is going to be okay?" I don't really have a good answer, so I'm going to be unfortunately no this evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Marts. Anyone else wanting to make comments or discussion? I'll keep my eye on the chat for a few more seconds. Council President Hunt with a question.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. This is Council President Hunt. I actually had a question for my fellow council member, Councilmember Marts, because I had a similar question about the ending fund balance. I think the projection is at this point that it would bring the fund balance to the target, but I wondered if we could have that formalized, if that would address your concern, or if your concern would extend beyond getting that in a formal, as formal information that's provided.
I'm not sure what you're. I'm sorry. I'm not sure what you're suggesting.
So my question would be if we could get the updated revenue projection and the updated ending fund balance as a percentage of expenditure, and it was between the 15 to 20%, if that would address your concern, or if that would not.
Yes, but if 5 of you already support this bill, I'm happy to have my vote just be a point of clarification for future budget conversations. So, but yes, if we had that information today, I would have cheerfully supported this amendment. Thanks.
City Administrator Bob Kritz, you want to provide a comment?
Yes, thank you. So we are 2 weeks from presenting Mayor Pauly's proposed budget. As I've mentioned, that budget will contain a ending fund balance projection for December 31st, 2022 of 19%. We anticipate at this point perhaps having as much of as $1 million of additional fund balance in the current year, which we're looking at. We're not ready to commit to that dollar amount, but we are looking to propose an expenditure of that as part of the budget process. So we're feeling very comfortable with these numbers. We know how important this is, and quite honestly came up with this package largely in response to the council's concern that we were ending years with too high of a fund balance that exceeded the requirement, the policy that the city council has. So I will report that to you and hope that helps the council in its decision-making.
Thank you, City Administrator Bob Kritz. And I'll just add on too, because I want to make sure it's clear. I directed this administration to make sure that during this year, as we were going back through a more typical revenue and expenditure year, that we were responsive to making sure that in 2021, we were coming back with the opportunities to make expenditures during the year so that we would stay within policy. They've done a really good job doing that, but it also can be confusing when you're just about to look at your new 2022 budget and you will be receiving some new revenue projections in that. So it is confusing, that is for sure, but we really do want to stay committed to that process of making sure if there are revenue exceeding revenue expectations in the year, that the council is considering spending those revenues in the year. Councilmember Walsh has a comment.
Thank you. This is Councilmember Walsh. I don't have a concern with the ending fund balance so much as this seeming, I don't want to sound crass, but kind of like a slush fund that's just getting pushed out at this point. Because I think if we're in a budget cycle, we're looking at this, and I don't mean anybody's using funds in a wrong way. I'm talking about how we choose what to spend on. And so if I was in the middle of a budget cycle and I was looking at $250,000 of street operating funds for the intelligent traffic system related maintenance, I would be able to evaluate that against other projects that were in that scope, or I would be given other options. At this point, this is really much more of a up or down vote on something that, as Councilmember Marks mentioned, is 7 figures. And while I might look at this and go, okay, in a budget cycle, I might say, hey, I have questions about this position, or I have concerns about why we're spending money on, record keeping instead of X, Y, and Z. When this comes in this type of a package, I feel like that's harder to do. I don't know why these projects were sourced. I don't know what other things were considered. And so at this point, as much as I do like many of these projects, I don't like the feel that this gives to spending a 7-figure situation. So I'm on the fence. I'm leaning toward voting no on this, just because of that situational piece.
Thanks. Councilmember DiMichele has a comment. And then I'll go to City Administrator Bob Quitz.
Thank you, Mayor Pauly. I do intend to support this motion. However, I hear my fellow council members' concerns and shared many of them. I did go through each item, looking at it, wondering, well, I wonder how this was chosen or that one was chosen. I have to say that as I went through, I could find a rationale for each one, and for several of them, a rationale for the money needing to be spent now rather than next year or as part of a budget process. And so, but I think it would have been helpful to our decision-making process to have seen just an overall table showing us the impact to the overall, reserve funds, and perhaps more information about the process, about how each one was chosen. I don't think that was elucidated as clearly as it could have been. That said, there's lots to like in this motion. There's some that I not only like, that I love, and I want more human services. I want the positions that are being talked about, and I like the expenditures on transportation and so forth. So I will support this, but I do think for future reference that we should be provided with more context, so that we do have a better understanding of why some things came to the top and other things did not. So, thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember DiMichele. See, Administrator Bob Quitz, I was going to go to Councilmember Goodman. I can circle back to you later if that's okay. Councilmember Goodman.
If Administrator Bob Quitz has something that he wants to add, that's fine before me.
Thank you. See, Administrator Bob Quitz.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. This is a pretty unusual circumstance. Most years you don't have money to reinvest in the organization. Really the impetus for this was your session that you had in person at the Tibbetts Creek Manor several weeks ago. I think the mayor and I left that meeting saying there's a lot of things the city council wants to get done, and we've not been able to do that because of the pandemic. And there's an opportunity with money to jumpstart some of the very things you prioritized during the course of that meeting. So I think if you were to go back and our apologies, perhaps we should have done a crosswalk from that discussion to some of these investments, because nearly all of them, I think, were informed by that discussion. I've been doing this as a manager, administrator, 20 plus years. I've never gone to a council and said, hey, let's hire some positions now because I know you're going to approve them anyway, because those were the very positions that came out of your meeting. And so rather than go through a process, know that you're going to fund it, get the money adopted in January, start recruiting, get people in March and April, we thought, well, let's just do it now. We've got some money out. The dollars and cents of those positions really are very small, but we wanted to do that. We've already made those IT investments. We wanted to show that. And most of the other larger ticket items were things that the council has said are important: transportation, planning, moving forward with City Hall Northwest. The reality is we cannot do anything with that building until all the paper's out of it, and we need to do something with all that paper. So really, what you see tonight came from you all. It's not something that really was driven by staff. It was driven by you all. The one thing I will say is that we have a lot of staff members who are tired, who are just done with this pandemic. And quite honestly, if we can give our field staff a new mower, that's going to do an awful lot to help them continue to come to work every single day in the midst of a pandemic. So I think while that probably didn't come up specifically in your discussions, a new mower, when I went to the departments and asked, what can we do to, help our employees and say, we hear them, we care about them, we understand the cuts that were made. As we look back, many of our neighbor jurisdictions didn't make the cuts that we did. They took a chance that everything was going to be okay, and we didn't do that. We took some cuts. So, what you're seeing tonight is really unusual. I don't suspect we'll do it again anytime soon, but it's really meant to move forward the goals and the priorities of this city council. And a little bit is meant to say to our employees, thank you. Here's some better tools to get work done. Here's some things that will finally get us out of City Hall Northwest once and for all, and we can move forward and look at what those facilities are. So again, Madam Mayor, my apologies if we didn't connect those dots more carefully at the top of this presentation, but that's the impetus behind all this.
Thank you, City Administrator. I'm going to add a few comments. We do have some more council members that do want to make comments as well. Thanks for what you said, Wally. I agree. I kind of have a foot in both camps in that I think what Councilmember DiMichele said about process is a good point. I think what you had said about this being unusual circumstances is also a good point, and the fact that our city did take a lot of cuts to be ready in case the pandemic had a longer economic effect than we were worried about. However, there is an opportunity for future council president or future council leadership or this council leadership to brainstorm about, if we're going to do this again, what do we want it to look like? And that's where I think some of the suggestions that Councilmember DiMichele could fit in. So this is the process we have this year. And again, it's unusual. Could we do better? Likely we can. And I heard some good suggestions tonight on how we could better connect the dots and do some better storytelling as well. Let's go to Councilmember Goodman, followed by Deputy Council President Ray.
Thank you, Councilmember Goodman here. I do intend to support this. I'm looking at this as something that is out of the ordinary. Typically, I don't think that it is a good idea for us to do something this large of a change, particularly this close to upcoming budget season. I do have a couple of questions, concerns. The number 14, the Community Planning and Development Department adjustment, we continually miss the mark. We've been talking about this ever since I've started on council, ever since I was on Land and Shore and we had this sort of, annual discussion about it, and then also at budget, I would suggest that it's time to renew the conversation about the option of billing for services rather than trying to guess what it's going to cost us. We just consistently miss the mark. I don't understand why. I'm sure there are a lot of good reasons, but it is a source of constant frustration for everyone. The other one that I have a question about is digitization of City Hall Northwest records. I know we have a ton of these. Anybody who's seen the storage facility knows that we have a ton of records that need to be put into digital format. In 2014, the council adopted a technology fee. I believe it was November 17, 2014, and we have a code for that. The agenda bill for that meeting talks about how that fee would be spent. And one of the items was to, and I quote from that agenda bill, fund backlogged and future technology projects. And the agenda bill says that that item was discussed at several budget meetings. And I vaguely recall the many times we talked about that. I don't have dates and I don't have materials for that. Maybe Councilmember Marts will recall differently than my recollection, but I do recall discussions about that fee either being available for possibly using part of that fee to digitize whatever, however you pronounce that word, those hard copy documents. I don't know if my recollection is correct that we were told that we could. I do recall having a discussion about it, whether we could or we could not. I don't remember that. But that raises a question for me for the upcoming budget discussions, which I have questions about how much we have collected for that technology fee and what we've spent it on. So I will support this tonight, but I also want to know, I fall short of calling it an audit of that fee because I don't want that, but I want the council to have information about what we've collected and what we've used it for. And I would appreciate if we can find information about what we were told about that fee in terms of digitizing those records. And then the agenda bill says tonight, the upcoming budget proposal will be asking for more money for that. I'd like to know what the estimated total cost during the budget, what the estimated total cost would be to get that project done. So sorry I was long-winded, but those are my couple of concerns, my requests, and I will be supporting this tonight. Thanks.
Thank you, Councilmember Goodman. Let's go to Deputy Council President Ray.
Thank you, Mayor Pauly. This is Chris Ray. Couple of thoughts. The first is to amplify what the city administrator says. We've been extremely financially responsible through the pandemic, and so we're in a very strong financial position that we wouldn't have if we had not taken some of the steps we did. Additionally, the recent revenue projections are kind of mind-blowingly positive, which gives me a certain amount of confidence that we are going to be in a strong financial position ending up this year. That being said, an opportunity to jumpstart some of the initiatives that we'd like to push for 2022, which I saw a number of them in this budget amendment, make sense. Also, given the labor market, if we can get a jumpstart on hiring for 2022, I think that makes sense, and this makes that possible. Now, with that all being said, given the magnitude of this amendment, it would be nice, I think this is something that Councilmember Walsh was alluding to, or maybe hitting directly on. We could have had more than one touch on this. We could have seen draft amendments so that we could have gone through this ahead of time. So I know that time is tight, and I know everyone's working really hard, but so just kind of going forward, particularly if we're going to talk, to steal the phrase from Councilmember March, 7-figure amendments, having a more structured, more touches process would probably make for more comfort in the final results. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Council President Ray. Are there any other council members that would like to make a comment? Keeping my eye on the chat. Council President Hunt.
Thank you. I appreciated hearing the concerns from my fellow council members, and I hope that in the future we can have 2 touches on this kind of substantial information. I think the final version could be presented. I think for me it is an exceptional circumstances, but at the same time, if we had more or a study session, for example, I think that would be more typical to our process and would have given us a better understanding. I did feel like I had the ability to ask my questions and have them answered at this meeting, and so I am comfortable with those answers. The community planning and development, the difference in the expected expenditure in that one, as Councilmember Goodman said, that has come up before, and so if we could try to account for that differently going forward, that would I think help. But overall, I think for the most part, it seems that, for example, with the positions, we're recovering services and positions that we cut back during COVID. We're assisting community recovery after COVID and after the associated budget impacts that we had associated with COVID. And I understand that both that impact was hard to predict and now the recovery will continue to be hard to predict. So overall, I think with the answers to the questions, I am supportive. I think going forward, having more opportunity to discuss and ask questions when it is such a substantial budget amendment would be useful for council. And I also lastly think that the information about the general fund and compliance with our financial policy, that's important to me and to a number of us. And so having that in the packet would also be useful and just help us connect the dots about why this is why we're doing this amendment. My understanding is in part because we have emphasized that we want to be within compliance, which this will put us at 19% projected expenditure as a percentage of revenue. And so I think that is important, and that is something that we've strived for. So I do support it. I also just wanted to let my fellow council members know that I think there were a lot of good points raised, and hopefully those will be taken into account in future versions of this conversation.
Thank you, Council President Hunt. Councilmember Marts.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I just want to clarify. It's my understanding that 19% refers to the ending fund balance at the end of 2022. If we had a similar number for the end of 2021, which this impacts, then I would be voting in favor, not against the amendment. Thanks.
Thank you, Councilmember Marts. Are there any other comments? Oh, sorry, I missed one. Councilmember Walsh.
Thank you. This is Councilmember Walsh. I continue to be torn by this package. I'm at this point, I highly, highly support these positions and getting them hired. The areas I struggle with are some of the other areas where we're spending money on projects or purchases where I'm having to evaluate them without the other areas. But I think ultimately at this point, because I think the positions are essential and important to get hiring on early, I will support this amendment. So thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Walsh. And I'm scrolling up and down to see if I have forgotten or missed anybody else. Okay, it looks like Council President Hunt has a question.
Yes, thank you. Okay, I this is Council President Hunt again, and I wanted clarity on the ending fund balance. So I thought I heard Susie say that we expected the ending fund balance for 2021 to be between 15 and 20% with this amendment. Did I misunderstand that? That 2022?
I think we heard lots of numbers put out there, but we'll let Susie clarify. I think her answer is a little more vague than that, but we'll see where she lands.
Thank you, Mayor Polly. Yes, intentionally vague. It is, as City Administrator Bobkowitz said, we anticipate ending with the proposed budget coming later this month, ending 2022 at 19%. Given the general fund forecast that was presented earlier this month, it is likely that we will end 2021 above 20%, given even with the amendments proposed tonight. These are numbers that we can run at this point and provide to the council. We just don't have it prepared this evening. It would be a bit of a moving target. As City Administrator Bobkowitz mentioned, we will be likely proposing additional amendments prior to the end of the year that would swing that number. But generally, at this point, based on best current information, it is likely we'll end 2021 above 20%.
And if I can add to that as well, Susie, I think what City Administrator was trying to get across is that we have a finance team and they have fixed tasks to do. And the one they have on their plate right now is to get you a budget in 2 weeks for 2022. So as part of that process, over your budget review, we will rerun the revenue projections, but we don't have the staffing and capacity to keep running them constantly. So right now, Susie and Autumn's team are focused on getting you the budget. And Susie gave you a very vague answer, which is that it's probably over 20%. But come November, I can't remember if it's November or October, but Autumn can weigh in here. You are going to get a new revenue updated projection, and that will definitely give you a better look at the end of this year. And it'll probably come with potential budget adjustment again if there are some priorities that can spend that money down before the end of 2021. So Autumn, what did you want to add in there?
I was going to reiterate what Susie said. So thank you, Susie, for that. And we can follow up with an estimate. But yes, we will come back to you with more revenue forecasts. We had one in August, and we will come back to you in October after the proposed budget is transmitted.
Council President, does that answer your question?
I think so. I think in the future, while I understand that there's a lot of things going on in the future, if we're asked for a 7-figure budget amendment, it would be good to get in writing, preferably with the packet, so we can all digest it, what the impact is on that target.
Noted. Thank you. Have I missed anyone with a comment or a question? Looking in the chat again, it looks pretty good. Okay, now I'll check back in with the city clerk. I believe we have moved and seconded, and that it would be appropriate for me to reread the motion at this point. Thank you, Tisha. So the motion before council is to adopt ordinance number, scrolling back
2951.
2951, amending the 2021 budget as set forth in ordinance number 2927 and amended in ordinance number 2939 concerning revenues, expenditures, and fund balance for various funds for the year 2021. And I'll get our city clerk to call the roll.
Starting with Deputy Council President Ray.
Aye.
Councilmember Walsh.
Aye.
Councilmember DeMichelle.
Aye.
Councilmember Goodman.
Aye.
Council President Hunt.
Aye.
Councilmember Marts.
No, nay.
That's 5 ayes, 1 nay.
Thank you. That passes 5-1. The next item of business this evening is good of the order. We have a comment, I believe, from City Administrator Bobkowitz.
No, you don't.
No, I don't. Okay. Looking in the, oh my God, I was way up in the comments. Okay, looking in the chat box to see if anybody has anything for good of the order. And I will go through a couple of announcements. Oh, let's start with Council President Hunt. She does have something for good of the order.
Thank you, Mayor Polly. As noted in the packet, I am going to briefly note the Council President appointments to the Capital Financing Community Task Force at this time. Council members Hall and Marts will serve on the Capital Finance Task Force, and additionally, Councilmember Goodman will serve on the task force and will shift to a mayor appointed at large position at the end of her term on council. So looking forward to seeing the good work come out of that task force, and wanted to make that announcement. Thank you.
Thank you, Council President Hunt, and thank you for your consideration. I'm very excited about the work that this Capital Finance and Community Task Force is undertaking. So thank you for your help with that. There are some upcoming council meetings. There's a City Council study session Tuesday, September 14th, and the potential agenda items include Julius Bone pool improvements, boards and commissions proposed stipend policy, and the Title 18 Land Use Code update. On September 20th, there's a regular council meeting with potential agenda items, including the PFAS update, the use of affordable housing funds, and the proposed 2022 budget presentation. Not seeing anything else for good of the order. The next item we have on our agenda this evening is an executive session. And as earlier announced, there will be an executive session held this evening to discuss collective bargaining for RCW 42.30.140(4). This item is expected to last 30 minutes. No action is anticipated to follow in open session. As a reminder, executive sessions are closed to the public. We will now recess into executive session at 9:14 p.m. However, we will start off that session with a little bit of a break, so you can grab a glass of water or a cup of tea or whatever it is that you need. So I ask the city clerk to move the city council into a separate session within this meeting, and anyone who is not part of the closed session will remain in the main meeting. You are welcome to stay in the main meeting until it is reconvened. City clerk, are we ready to move?
Let me just confirm that we have the right people here. I'm going to go ahead and move out Issaquah City Television.